Hello everyone and welcome to One Controller Report. This is a multi-tap episode where we bring other people onto the show to talk about various topics. And this is actually part 2 of an episode I did with Speedy Noelle and Filler that came out not too long ago. So that episode included a discussion just generally about like Speedy Noelle's Amelie Doree channel, you know, what her goals are, the content she's created, as well as some updates on Filler's side regarding some of his projects, including an Oh My Goddess fan translation. And we also did some general talks about games like the Galaxy Fallen Yuna FX title and a discussion of Angelique Special along with some of the later titles in that series. So if you haven't already, I really hope you take the time to go listen to that. But this time we'll be talking about 2 specific topics. One is about various talent from the anime industry that worked within the PCFX space, and the second is talking about, you know, what the PCFX needs to become popular, what some of its struggles are, what could potentially change that in the future, things like that. So this is going to jump right into the second part of this episode. Again, thank you so much for coming and listening, and I hope you enjoy. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier with like, Oh My Goddess, I in our conversation about that, like I'm not a huge anime fan. That's not really a big thing I'm into. So one thing that I think is a little hard for me and maybe communicating to my audience about at times is the importance of this console from an anime perspective, because I can point to things like, hey, there are voice actors who are involved on this system. You know, you have these anime freak discs and things like that where you get these little bits of information and stuff. But that's also stuff that like appears on other consoles in a lot of ways too. And I think that's something that I've always kind of felt like I haven't conveyed enough like what this series means to like an anime fandom. So Filler, you had mentioned to me before this podcast that like recognizable like anime talent in the industry kind of had some involvement on the system in different ways, in a way that like you might expect from like a Hideo Kojima in the gaming industry or things like that. So I was curious if you could go into a little more detail about, you know, what kind of connections there are there, and what kind of value do you think an anime specific like personality gives to a game on the PCFX?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think initially what I was thinking is that, you know, the Nintendo games have like Shigeru Miyamoto, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, not only is he like a recognizable, basically a household name at this point, right? But, you know, he's talent that Nintendo really fostered, you know, really key to the company. And, you know, a lot of these companies really have key talent that they were using. And, you know, I really was not a PC Engine fan in particular. Not that I don't like the system or the games on it, because I actually do. In fact, I'm working on like fan translating more PC Engine games now. But, you know, I was kind of like, well, what does the PCFX have? Like, who is the Shigeru Miyamoto of the PCFX? Like, was that even a thing? Or like, why wasn't it, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think what we see, though, is we do see some talented people who have worked in the anime industry, which has its own names, right? You know, I started looking into a little bit more, hey, you know, who has worked on some of these PCFX games? Because I recognize some stuff, right? Like even back in the day, what is it? Der Langrisser, the character designs are all done by Satoshi Urishihara, right? Who at the time I had just barely watched Plastic Little. So that's an OVA that also, you know, has his character designs. And so for me, there was this real sense of continuity between these anime shows that I was watching and then these games that I was seeing on the PCFX. So have you guys noticed like any recognizable like a cover art or something like that on the games that you've like, you know, checked out so far?
I could say on my side, like, because I don't have that connection in the same way, I don't really see that stuff usually. The one thing I have noticed is it Chip Chan Kick? But I think that's like more because I recognize the PC98 team who worked on that stuff, and I don't know if that artist has a connection anywhere else. It is
I
a very
believe-
distinct look, though, and
It
very,
definitely is.
very over horny kind of thing. So
Yeah, no, I'm a little embarrassed to admit. I believe I like know the Dojin circle that they work in.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, you know, I mean, and yeah, definitely, like that's one of those things. I think for me, like, just in researching this just over the past couple of days in anticipation of this podcast, one of the most surprising things that I found out is Marina Ono, or I guess Ono Marina, she's a pretty famous voice actress and singer, right? She is the voice actress for Rolfie, who's the PCFX mascot character.
Okay.
And so I started doing a little bit of research on her, and I found that this was pretty fascinating. So I didn't realize that she was really pursuing a career in music. She sort of kind of began in 1988 using a different stage name. It was actually Matsumoto Hiromi. She changed it to Katayama Hiromi later on, and it seems like she pretty much spent about 8 years trying to break into the entertainment industry. And you know, coming into the 90s, she basically got with a different production company, and she started pursuing voice acting as a path to basically singing and performing music. So it seems like her voice acting debut was actually on the PCFX as the you know, sort of mascot character for the PCFX in the Anime Freak discs, right? She also was Rolfie in the Tonari no Princess Rolfie game, and it was just such an interesting story. And you know, like, I have some other people that I've looked up. For instance, like Kota Takiuchi. I actually was just, I think I mentioned this before, but I was searching for PCFX stuff on Twitter, and I ran into literally a conversation between Kota Takiuchi and she actually she keeps changing her stage name. She actually goes by Marina now, which I think is really funny. I mean, it's great. So you know, between him and Marina, and they were actually just like commiserating about like you know, when they were working together, you know, earlier in their career on like PCFX games and stuff.
Oh,
he actually wrote the scenario for Tonari no Princess Rolfie, and he wrote the scenario for Makeru na Makendo Z. Now, I was looking into his stuff a little bit more. Kota Takiuchi, he had, it seems like he'd done some script work for games that I think must have been out before the PCFX. So I don't think like this was his like first professional work or anything like that. But I'm starting to come around to maybe a slightly different perspective on the PCFX, and I don't know if you know, there could just be a little bit of both of these things happening. But I feel like as I'm researching more of the people that did the work on these games, who came from working in animation, working in you know, the entertainment industry and music and writing for games and things like that, it almost seems more like the FX was a place where like lesser known talent was maybe being given opportunities than it was a place where veteran talent was coming and lending their clout, right, or their names or anything like that to the games that were being made. So I mean, from here it's really just speculation on my part, but it's an interesting perspective that I haven't had on the system before, and I guess I wonder, you know, how much truth there is to that, or if maybe I'm just, you know, reading a little bit too much into kind of Marina's you know, personal story. But I just thought that was interesting.
I'd probably imagine there's a mix, and I can't say this with any like real certainty, but so actually I was digging into the voice cast for another game on the system called Sparkling Feather a little bit. And one of the characters, I was translating or trying to translate her little like blob of text because it was suspicious in a lot of ways, where it was like, oh, I'm a 12-year-old girl. Also, my positive trait is my sex appeal. And I'm like, is this actually what it's saying, or is this like some weird machine translation thing that's happening? As far as I can tell with the people I worked with, it is her saying that she is proud of her sex appeal. But the voice actor though for it is Kiko Inoue,
Yes.
something like that.
Yes, she actually is the voice actress for Belle Dandy in Oh My Goddess.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So she has a history. It seems like, at least on our wiki, it goes back to like 1988, and it looks like Ramna Half had a character in there between 1989 and 1992.
She's a giant of the industry.
So that would have been 6-7 years before they even took up role in Sparkling Feather.
Sure.
Which actually, I don't think Sparkling Feather is listed on here, which maybe I shouldn't be too surprised. Nobody cares about Sparkling Feather. But it is something that I think you do see. It is probably a mix of the two, I would think, to some degree. But I think what would be important maybe is like how much of that you see on each side. And that might be something that you couldn't really do without just like going through basically every person who worked on a PCFX game and like looking into their history, right? Or getting somebody who worked and had that as like we did this as an incentive or something like that when we were building this platform and the library on there.
Part of the trouble is without doing the research and whether or not the information is even out there, we're not going to really know, what was going on in the heads of the executives kind of making the major decisions, and then the, sort of the managers and stuff actually working on, the trajectory of the PCFX, and then the specific projects and things like that. I will say, for me though, one of the things I still really enjoy about the PCFX is that I keep seeing these things, right? I keep finding these names of people that I'm familiar with. I keep seeing the illustrations or the character designs or the animation or something done by people that I know. It's a fun thing about the system.
I will say, on the note of some, ties to other stuff, well, one is that I was looking up Kikuko Inoue's, what would you call a discography for a voice actor? I actually don't know. Anyways, I was looking at it, and I noticed she actually played Yoshiko in Dokusei, at least for probably the PC Engine and Saturn versions, which is neat because I love her as a character. Second is that the character designer for Angelique made a fairly successful light novel series called Saiun Koko Monogatari, which I need to read, but like her work on Angelique, it's gorgeous and interesting to see, her branch out of just video games. And the last thing I have to note is that the voice actor, I believe it's for Satomi and Pia Carrot, Nadahashi Miki, actually plays, I believe, Reinhardt in Legend of Galactic Heroes, which is a really, really funny... At one point, she played Reinhardt, which is a really funny tie, and if someone wants to make fan art of that, please let me know. I want to see Satomi cosplaying as Reinhardt, but I just thought that was amusing that... you can find voice actor ties everywhere on any system, but if we're on the topic of, ties from the PCFX to the larger anime industry, that was just a funny one I had to note.
Yeah, and I think maybe the thing I always come back to with this kind of stuff, or at least, as somebody who's ignorant of the anime industry and stuff like that, is I feel like this stuff was happening on the PlayStation and Saturn. It's just the how condensed it is on the PCFX, like how focused the PCFX is on that. Because when I think, when I had to, explain, I did, a panel at an anime expo. I was like, okay, here's a console about anime, essentially, right? And I had to think about, what makes this unique. And a lot of the things I could find examples on other systems, but those other systems don't have an anime girl as their mascot. So
it's the density of it.
Yeah.
The PCFX only has 60, 50 something games. I forget what's the count excluding demos, but there is this consistency and quality and styling between that entire library. So for the PS1, you do have a lot of these famous voice actor ties. And like I said, you can find that literally anywhere, but the library is so vast that you pick out a random PS1 game and there's very little chance you're going to find ties to other stuff. That's, super important. You pick out a random PCFX game and it's like, oh, I know this voice actor, I know this voice actor, oh, I might know this character artist, I know this lead designer, I know this scenario designer. So it's not like, in terms of actual amount of games, like, you could probably find hundreds of PS1 and Saturn games combined like this. But on the PCFX, it is just so dense with ties to other media and other projects.
Filler, you might have knowledge of this. So one thing I hear often in like other PCFX videos and stuff like that is like NEC basically told people if it's not anime girl game, don't make the video game kind of thing, right? I have no idea where that came from, if that is like a legit claim or if people just make that assumption based off the library. Do you know A, if what I'm talking about, and B, if it's like something that's actually a real thing?
Yeah, I mean, I have not confirmed that in any capacity. I mean, it's certainly like, I feel like rumors like that get out there, and it's hard to know exactly, if there's no source, like did this just come out of, people making assumptions, or like was there some kind of precedent for that? Did it come from an interview, or who knows what? That's nothing that I've ever really run into that I could confirm or deny it. One thing I'm kind of hopeful about, and I don't know if this is going to really shed much more light, but recently David Shadoff's collection of PC Engine fan magazines was, he shipped them to, Gaming Alexandria?
Yep, correct, yep.
And they scanned all of the issues that he had. So I don't know if that was a complete collection or if it completed, what they had. But, I have demo discs from like a lot of those PC Engine fan magazines, but I don't have the actual magazines. And, it can be tedious to try to translate from magazine scans and things like that. Mm-hmm. But, it's possible that there could be some more information in material like that.
I've used Gaming's Alexandria's scans sometimes as I think even my One video I used to trying to pin down, there's this rumor of the game starting as a shoot 'em up and changing genre partway through development. And as far as I can tell, that rumor is actually entirely true. There's in fact concept art of Yuna having like a spaceship form and some options she could get during gameplay. But I actually looked through PC Engine fan issues to try and pinpoint the first public preview of the game. And the first public preview, I think after the game was announced to exist, was in fact in that visual novel form. So those scans are really helpful to see, and it is in fact a complete library. They announced on Twitter that I believe David's collection, I don't think he has a complete collection, but what he had filled in all the blanks that they had. And they actually had some additional stuff like appendixes uploaded as well, like one with Dokusei concept art. So it's a huge, huge boon to research for both PC Engine and PCFX to have all that laid out publicly in high quality scans.
That's great. That's great to hear. And I'm really hoping that, maybe if we do this again in a year or something like that, like maybe, or even if it's not us, if it's other people, being able to get a little bit of, additional information from a resource like that could just, be really helpful.
Is there a group that, I know there's like on the Nintendo side, I think there's like a group called Glitterberry that goes back and translates those kind of things often. Is there a group that kind of is dedicated to that for the PC Engine specifically that might bleed over?
Never that I've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here.
Gotcha. Well, I will hope. I can't read Japanese, so I can't do it. Sorry for that. But I will.
The pressure.
I will dream of information out of there and somebody translating First Kiss Story interviews so I can look at that someday. So it's really interesting. Like, oh man, like, okay. Sudden Hunex moment. Like they're the developer on that system that they have like ties in the PC Engine, and then they're essentially the first party developers for PC.
Yeah.
FX essentially. So they put out stuff all the time. And like I made a post a while ago because I bought a First Kiss Story art book, or like I think it's like album collection or something like that. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah.
But if you take the cover of the art book off, there's a additional bit of text on the back of it. And when I machine translated it, it looked almost like an apology that was like, hey, we put out the PlayStation version. Sorry, Hunex Fighters 98 is not in it, basically. And they're like, we want to focus on these other things, which is the true story kind of thing. So I posted about that because I was like, oh, it's interesting. It's like a weird apology. And then that person you put me in contact with, Filler, the Hunex Fighter guy who worked on that, he followed up with me later, and he was like, hey, like, the reason it wasn't in there is because the guy who was like the producer on First Kiss Story didn't want to give it up for the PlayStation version of the game. And he's like, I want this to be a special thing for the PCFX. So he was like, we had it running, but they never put it out on every, and like he doomed every future version of First Kiss Story to not have that in there anymore.
Oh my god!
So it's kind of sad that happened, but
it is a little, yeah.
But it is kind of funny, and like, you know, there's things like, you know, there's Dreamcast games like Industrial Spy, Operation Espionage, where like the password for the final level of the game is Future X, which is like, you know, what FX stands for in PCFX kind of thing. So it's like really interesting to see that passion from those developers like bleed out and be like, this was our console, this is our baby, in a very like, you know, 90s Sega Nintendo way of like, this is the console war, and this is our like this system. You know, Yuji Naka has his own way that he feels about Sega, and it's maybe to an abusive extent based off the stories about it. But, and then, you know, I think there's like a pride that's with it, and it's like interesting to see that like PCFX pride that comes with Hunex specifically in the past. You know, today Hunex is, you know, more or less a different company. But although I found that the CEO right now was at the company back then, and I actually emailed him a little bit because I was trying to see if I could do an interview with him when I was in Japan, and he did not let me come. But that's okay. I understand. So.
That's really cool. You know, you are definitely proving that you're braver than I am, because like I have been tempted to reach out to you know, Marina and Kota Takiuchi and just be like, hey, like, you know, would you tell me about your work on the PCFX and stuff? But I've been too shy thus far to do anything like that.
One thing I hate about the modern internet discussion, and this is not, you know, saying anything bad about the content we make and everything is from a Western perspective, I feel like.
Yeah.
And it's always the discovery of this thing. This is the thing, we're discovering it from a Western perspective, right? And I really would like more Japanese perspectives on most things we talk about. I think that's like really underserved, even down to just like literally the people. And I think, Filler, you try to do this a little bit with like going and translating people's impressions and stuff like that, right? And I think, what is her name? There's like a lady who does it as well.
Oh, yeah. Zuvi's Game Room.
She does the same thing, and I would love to see more of that. And I think a lot of these kind of gaps would be filled in as those kind of perspectives come in, as you start talking to people who are, you know, at the company working on these things, even if they're not big voice actors today, right? People who were involved back then, and maybe they're just off doing whatever now, right? And I don't know if anybody is communicating with them in any way. Like, you have like the Mr. Gimmick developer for the NES, the composer for that, and he's like just off doing like, I forget what he was doing, but just like random work or something, and then suddenly finds out like 20 years later, oh, there's a whole scene behind like remixing the Mr. Gimmick like, like soundtracks and things like that, and like having that connection finally happen, right? I would love to see more of that in general with this kind of stuff. And I really hope that is a good starting point with the Gaming Alexandria collection, and hopefully people start doing that. I feel guilty saying that, though, because I'm not the one who's going to do it. So I feel like a jerk being like, hey, you guys should go do that, even though I'm not the one who, like, I could do it. I'm a human being. I have the capability of learning Japanese, right? But
it's time consuming.
Yeah. So
I will say, on that topic, and this isn't, like, you know, to call out anybody or say anything, but I feel like particularly in Western gaming circles, there is this tendency, and I know I've talked about it earlier, like, you know, people haven't really dug through these libraries in Western circles, and that's why people find them fascinating. But there is this tendency to completely attribute it as, look at this lost system I'm discovering, look at this lost thing that's discovering, without realizing, you know, there's been entire communities of people in other languages based around these things, people who have dedicated tons of time to it. And that's something, well, when I do my videos, I want to try and avoid that. I don't want to be like the authoritative voice of, look at this cool thing I discovered, look at this super weird random Japanese thing. I want people to know that, like, you know, these games have these storied histories and they have these importance in other cultures and subcultures and stuff like that, and it's important to make people aware of that instead of focus entirely on, wow, look at this mysterious thing that no one's ever heard of.
Yeah, that's one thing I think I fail at with, like, the Nintendo G video I did recently for DSiWare. So
it's hard not to.
It's hard not to, and, like, it's also hard to find the resources. Like, I did go online and read people's impressions of Nintendo G, but, like, even that was pretty like slim. Sorry, I'm just throwing out video game names randomly here again.
You're good.
But you know, I think it's like it's interesting to try to do the research on that stuff and get people's opinions. I was looking at a Sparkling Feather review recently. It's interesting to see, like, what somebody in the time was thinking about that game. Confirming that it was indeed a bad video game, but they did praise it for the PCFX aspect of, like, hey, full motion video, like, there's a lot of it in here and stuff. And I will say that's something that I struggle with sometimes, is appreciating full motion video specifically on the PCFX, because it does look so rough when you, like, upscale it. You really need to have it on, like, a CRT, and that's not something I do. So.
Right, I only play I pretty much only play retro games on a CRT unless I'm emulating, like, you know, PC98. Older VNs, I kind of have to play them on a newer computer because I need to be able to get my text hooker in, but, like, I'm considering getting a USB-C to VGA adapter so I can actually play them on the CRT, because, you know, I feel like when you start trying to really upscale and play some of these games that are really dependent on the defects of a CRT to look decent, like PCFX FMV is, you start to kind of lose track of what it was like back then. Like, you know, I look at my UniFX video, I look at how it looks in editing and posted, I'm like, oh my god, this FMV looks so mediocre processed for YouTube and an upscaler, but I see it on my CRT and I'm like, holy crap, it's almost like I'm watching a VHS tape at points. Like, you know, it's an interesting facet of these games that a lot of them really were dependent on the defects of displays at times to look palatable.
So one thing that's kind of interesting about that thing is, like, and I think I talked about this last time we talked filler on a podcast, is, like, I feel like there's a disconnect in some ways with how, you know, when we look at retro games online, we're seeing it in that, like, high quality upscaled look. You know, you can't really replicate a CRT look without taking a picture off a CRT, right? And one thing that I think is a limitation of, like, the PCFX being as appealing as something like, say, the PC98, is that when you get those screenshots with the PC98, they are these crisp, you know, highly detailed image with, like, limited color palettes, but they do really interesting things. And then when that gets transitioned over to, like, a PCFX, you know, it's almost like, you know, everything, I don't know the technicals behind it, but, you know, everything gets kind of, like, blurred together. The color palette seems to darken, and there are sprites in the game that, like, you know, that still have that pop because, you know, they're actual, you know, sprites that are being, I assume, rendered out by the system. But something like I assume a JPEG of a animated frame they took a picture of, like, just does not transition over well.
No, unless you're seeing it on a CRT, because the PCFX literally does use JPEG compression. It uses a special form of motion JPEG. So when you have, you know, these animated video sequences, I even noticed this with UniFX, is that, you know, my CRT is nice and colorful and saturated. You look at it in the video and the post-processing, and it's a lot of the color, a lot of the what feels like should be detail is just gone because that comes from the nature of a CRT. And the PC98, I think the reason the PC98 gets hit less by it is, one, it is, you know, it's not JPEG, it's just straight up rendered through a graphics system. But second, the PC98 is also higher resolution, significantly higher resolution, which it helps a lot with colors popping and being able to do dithering and making these vibrant, you know, you only got a couple of colors in an image, you're going to use them as best you can, and the result is these really vibrant things. And I think sometimes when you have games that, like, I think Oh My Goddess is actually a good example, because I think it still looks good on PCFX, but you compare it to how the color is used on the PC98 version, and it sometimes feels like artists really struggle to figure out, they want to use all these new colors, they don't know how to use all these new colors, and even on PC games you see that as well. Like, compare, say, compare Isaku on the PC98 to Isaku's Windows remake, and there's just, like, there's more colors there, but everything pops less.
Yeah. And I sometimes wonder if that's like one of the defining lines between like, because I do think there is, and maybe I'm just like, depending on your echo chamber and stuff like that of like who you talk to, I do feel like there's a lot more of a positive attitude towards the PC98 in that like regard. Like the conversation there seems a lot more open. Admittedly, there are a lot more games on there, but you don't really see that kind of like negative portrayal. I feel like even though it has, if not like the same worse than what the PCFX has in terms of erotic content and stuff like that. And that is like kind of one of the big sticking points for people in a lot of ways for that. So I think that's like one thing I think is really kind of holds the system back a little bit in that regard. Although like I do feel like there is like this is like a very minimal thing still, but I feel like there's a growing appreciation of people like taking pictures of CRTs now too and like showing what that looks like.
Absolutely.
But we're not at a point that we can like realistically replicate that in a way for most people, right?
No.
I've never used CRT filters in a game. Has anyone ever had good experience with that? Or?
I haven't really used them. Supposedly the kinds of filters included with the RetroTink are super impressive, the RetroTink 5X, and I know in recent times there's been a lot of efforts made to make really good CRT filters for emulators, and surely when I look at them, they do actually look, genuinely great, but at the same time, I feel like I look at these, and no matter how nice they look, they still don't quite get the experience of a real CRT. And some of that I feel comes from the fact that in CRT and retro gaming communities, there's a lot of fetishism of professional video displays, particularly Sony models with these super crisp pictures, when, in reality, a lot of people, if they were playing these games on a CRT, even, a lot of people were using not particularly great quality CRTs. A lot of people were using stuff that really hid those defects more than even what the developers were saying. Recently I was at a local fighting game meetup, and we had a mystery game night, and I brought my Sega Saturn with Twinkle Star sprites and this cheap RCA television that just so happened to have component input. And, it compared to an emulator, it looks absolutely different. It looks a lot more saturated. Everything blends together more. And I feel like that was the ideal environment that these console games were made to be seen in. And the reason the PC98 prevails so much, despite, like you said, it has, frankly, significantly worse erotic content than the PCFX does. It's significantly more extreme for a lot of games. But the PC98 was always meant to be viewed on sharp computer displays, which gives it a huge boost when you're looking at it through sharp emulation, whereas the PCFX was, made to be through those crappy televisions. So I think the PC98 gets a lot more appreciation and rep despite being just as often erotically driven as a lot of PCFX games are, just because on an aesthetic art perspective alone, you get people drawn in by how good a lot of these games look. And that, for a lot of people, can kind of quickly override this game's super kinky. So people will look past that for just a moment to let their guard down and you can actually talk to them about the games. Whereas with the PCFX, it looks like every other console game emulated. It takes a lot more effort to get people to even try and appreciate what's being done in the games themselves.
On a technical level, too, the PCFX is held back a little bit by the fact that it only has S-Video and AV out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, and also, it seems like a lot of other communities, like, just from a hardware perspective, like people have worked really hard to do like RGB mods and things like that. I don't know how feasible something like that would be for the PCFX, because as far as I know, a lot of these, kind of like at the sort of processor and hardware level, like they were interpreting video as RGB signals and then converting it to whatever the type of analog signal that you would have for AV and things like that. So doing those kind of mods is a little bit easier. But I just don't even think that there's kind of the hardware community around the PCFX to do some of these mods to be able to get higher quality, higher resolution video out of the system. I know I was doing a video where I just had my camera pointed at the CRT and I had Last Imperial Prince on there. I think it was when I was, I was just using it for illustration purposes. But one of my buddies commented, it was like, wow, that looks really nice. And, you can video CRTs I think what tends to happen when you just point a camera at a CRT is that it tends to get a little blown out, just because the camera is more sensitive than your eyes to light, right? So if you literally just turn the brightness down on the CRT, you can get an extremely good image on a camera. But literally, like, it almost seems like the best thing to do for the PCFX would be to film off of your CRT, to be able to basically like get a little bit of an impression of like what you're looking at.
I think there's a lot of value in presenting it in both ways, because I do think it kind of depends on the person to some degree. Because I kind of get some weird, like, sick pleasure out of seeing, like, what's happening in overscan and stuff like that. So I'm like, I kind of love seeing how splotchy and bad it looks in some ways. I'm just like, what were they doing? Like, you can see every little bit they're doing. And I think the missing connection there is, like, and I know some people have, like, a setup where they record both, right? They have a CRT sitting beside them, and they have it set up to upscaler, so they can actually see those techniques be applied down. So I think there's value to both, but when you think about it from like a visual appreciation of like, this just looks good, for sure, I think a CRT is the best option for that.
Yeah.
So there's kind of that aspect, and I think another part of to kind of lean more into the conversation of why the PCFX never really catches on, and why I don't know if it ever will catch on into the system library, is just that or at least from a larger than niche audience, is that I think when you look at import games, most people are looking for those kind of quick fix goes, and until there's like a significant effort to fan translate these games in a larger manner, I do feel like that's just going to always hold the system back in that regard. Filler, I don't know if you have any thoughts on like what it would take to get to that position.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's making me think of the shoot 'em up scene, right? Which I think is actually pretty pertinent in sort of the NEC like kind of like PC engine fan base, right? Because like those are sort of the games that you do not need any sort of Japanese knowledge to play. They're very accessible. They're also just really actiony and arcadey. They're pretty much perfect for importing, and so you see like prices are really high on them, and there's a kind of a dedicated fan base around that. And I feel like I've always wanted to see more of a fan base just in general growing up around adventure games, romantic adventure games, like, visual novels, like that kind of thing. And I think you're seeing that now, and you're seeing like, people, like some people are actually just like being like, hey, let's check out the PCFX, finally. So that's great. But, I guess in terms of, translation and things like that, like I had a real moment, I posted a thread on one of the PC Engine forums. I think it was like the PC Engine FX forum, and I was like, or no, it was the PC Engine Software Bibles forum. I was like, what games deserve to be translated on the PCFX, right? Because not to just be a downer, like, right, but like we're mortal, and who knows how long we've got, right? And I'm just like, with my track record on these games, like even if I worked really hard, it's hard to just get translation projects to completion. And some of these games are so text heavy that just the translation part, if it's just one person working on the script, it really takes a long time. And I'm like, if I'm translating a long script and it takes me like a year to translate it in my spare time, like how many of those games am I gonna like manage to finish? How many of them are gonna actually end up like publicly available translation
it can't
patches?
Just be you. Like I think even professional translators would be have a pretty significant like number of games under their belt if they translated 60 video games,
right. So I mean, I feel like my goal at this point is like, well, if I could get another 2, 3, 4 games translated for the PCFX, like I think I would be more than satisfied. I mean, if one of those ends up being oh my goddess, like that just is what it is, like that's fine. It's a fun game, but I don't know where the translation scene is really going for PCFX. I mean, it's encouraging that somebody like just went and did a partial translation patch for Farland Story FX.
Yeah.
Like I knew nothing about that, so that was cool. That happened like completely outside of like any community or people or anyone that I'm associated with. So I'd like to see more of that. I don't know if we're gonna, but
Right.
I hope so.
Right.
I think a big thing that would need to ask for something like that is like, where does the community for the PCFX come from if you want to see more people come in? Because I think the real answer is that historically, the PCFX has been largely, I think, brought up because of the PC Engine, right? Mm-hmm. That is where that community comes from. And as somebody who's not a PC Engine fan, I can't really sympathize like too closely with like how they feel and things like that. But the general gist I get is that, PC Engine has this particular library of games, very accessible imports. PCFX does not. And I don't think... Well, I guess the other kind of side of that is going back to like what Noelle said earlier with Yuna, is that is a text-heavy game, right? And you see people starting to translate those games there. So maybe like I kind of was of the mind that the PCFX or PC Engine community would probably never really appreciate the PCFX, but maybe it's more of the PC Engine community just needs to dig deeper into that library.
Yeah.
And that might make that bridge happen.
And I think part of the other issue is, some of the PCFX's real heavy hitter games, some of the ones that I think are really interesting and important, like Takiuchi 2 is a good example of a game that, I've heard multiple times is absolutely fantastic. It's at that point in Hiroto Masato, the writer's career, where he was really doing interesting stuff with dating sims and visual novels and adventure games as a genre, wanting to explore a lot of really interesting and progressive themes. But, even if it got fans translated, I feel like it would run into the same issue as Pia Carrot, where people see, oh, this is a dating sim, so I'm not interested in it because people will, shrug that off as weird anime stuff. And I feel like for a lot of the PCFX's library to get popular, if it wanted to get super popular and shake off the stigma of the, otaku dating games machine and get a fan base outside of people who are diehard PC Engine fans who want to see what else NEC did, you'd have to see people start getting more and more interested in those types of video games. And I think to some extent that could happen. I think it's difficult to shake off the Western idea that dating sims and Japanese adventure games are all basically just hentai. Like, it's a really hard perspective to completely shake off for people. But there has been a lot more move towards people appreciating those types of games. So I feel like with the way that the Western visual novel and dating sim scene is growing and the way people are getting more and more curious about these games, and I know my channel's small, but as I'm talking about these games, I constantly get people saying like, wow, I never would have been interested in this kind of game before. I kind of like Japanese, anime and stuff like that, and I've been curious about visual novels. It's really cool that these kinds of games have actual like writing and themes and stuff in them. So I feel like at some point, if the visual novel and dating sim scene keeps growing as it is in the Western gaming sphere, we could see more people growing interested in the PCFX because, there's tons of other platforms that have these kinds of games on them. The PC98 is filled with them, but the PCFX is really the only console that is just absolutely loaded with them, and a lot of really creative and interesting ones at that.
This might be a question for outside the scope of this podcast, but when we think about visual novels today, like, how successful are they? I know they're much more accepted. Like, because when I started playing visual novels, it was definitely like, and I came from the same crowd, most people being like, oh, this is just horny, dumb stuff.
Yeah.
I'm going to play this as a joke. And then I played one as a joke and was like, oh, this is actually really good.
Yeah.
But,
the trap.
The trap.
Yeah.
The trap.
What's actually funny? What's funny on that idea of, what's funny for that is, it seems like they actually have a pretty decent level of success. Like, we see there are some decent sized companies that are really trying to localize and popularize this stuff. Like, the Vita in the US was partly kept afloat because it had tons of otome games getting published for it. It's a system full of otome games. Steins Gate, the visual novel, you know, the anime was a huge hit for anime fans, but the visual novel as well has been a big success in Western spheres. You see a lot of these Western VNs have caught on more and more as time gone on. Even Dokusei, which I recently took a look at, my roommate looked at the statistics for how many people were playing it on Steam, and you know, for the size of the game, for the kind of game it is, and how even more it leans heavy on the whole dating thing, which I talk about in my video, but that game is very thematically, surprisingly super progressive and very interesting to play from a woman's perspective, and the kinds of issues it talks about that very little other media wants to talk about. You know, that game actually had it seemed like really good player numbers on Steam, so it you know, as much as visual novels are still a niche medium in Western spheres, it really does feel like they keep growing and growing, and they're at a point where people are just, you know, it's an unstoppable momentum where people are just continually growing more interested in them.
Yeah, actually, one thing I did, so I'm assuming we're all familiar with Nekopara here, probably, although I guess I should maybe
Unfortunately,
explain it.
yes.
Yeah, so I never played this.
I'm not sure if I am.
Oh, gotcha. It is like a Steam game that is, I think it has erotic content in the non-Steam version, or you get like a patch or something like that.
Yep.
And that is a fairly popular one, basically a bunch of cat girls at like a maid cafe kind of thing, if I recall correctly. Something along those lines. And as of last year, apparently it has sold 5 million units on Steam.
Right. Nekopara is weird because it was one of the first, from what I remember, it was one of the first visual novels to really get localized onto Steam, and one of the first, like, straight-up eroge. And Nekopara, the reason I say, like, I'm unfortunately aware of it is because I feel like Nekopara is one of the worst representations of the genre.
Gotcha.
I talk about Pia Carrot, and I can talk about the fact that its women are incredibly well written. It deals with a lot of topics that hit hard for me. I can talk about Dokusei and how it deals with it deals with a lot of issues with women that men aren't aware of. It deals with objectification. It deals with the treatment of sex workers. It deals with a lot of difficult topics. And then you have something like Nekopara, which is just the absolute peak of capitalism will try to make everything as marketable as possible. Yeah. So it takes eroge as a concept, and it's just like, are cat girls popular? Okay, we'll give you cat girls. Is it popular to have a, you know, whatever the hell goes on in Nekopara? I don't remember exactly, but I know. It's like, you know, Nekopara is the absolute worst example of this genre. It's the most fed through the grinder, sell a million copies example of it. And it's what a lot of people think of with this genre. And that's really sad for something that, you know, there's a game I was really interested in recently, Sui Senka, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with Drakengard, but Drakengard 1 is a game that is very purposely not fun because it's about how horrible war is, and it's very subversive. And I've heard Sui Senka described as it's the Drakengard of eroge. So, you know, a genre that's like, hey, here's an hour of incredible peak 2000s metafiction and a ton of garbage to contextualize that metafiction, and the games that are super progressive, and the only one that people know is the funny cat girl maid game.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, that's. I feel like that's a big part of why visual novels have had so much trouble, because what people are bringing over is the bottom of the barrel marketable to a otaku stuff, and it's really disappointing.
Or that's kind of what people latch on to.
Exactly.
It's kind of like the thing that gets, you know, talked about the loudest. Right. I want to ask you, Noelle, because I was just thinking about, you know, like that Welcome to Pia Carrot video that you did and the reception that it had, right? Yeah. Because I think, I mean, obviously for me, like, you know, it's preaching to the choir, right? But like, I was really surprised that like the reception seems overwhelmingly positive to me, right? And I guess I'm wondering if I'm, you know, mistaken in that perception, like if you got, you know, any negative feedback on that video.
No.
And it just also, if you think that, like, you know, maybe a video like that, you know, is starting to, you know, maybe just repair a little bit of the perception. that I think we're talking about.
So you're right that actually the perception has been like entirely positive. Like I haven't gotten any comments that were negative about it. One thing I was really worried about is, particularly being a trans woman on the internet, you get a lot of people who do, you see stuff like that is typically super male dominated, and you get a lot of awful comments. But no, a lot of people were not only interested in the game, but they were happy to see like, oh wow, a woman talking about this stuff adds some credibility to these issues as someone who personally is familiar with them, as someone who understands a lot of what's happening in the game. A lot of people saw that and like, wow, there is way more to this than I thought there was. There were people who saw my DokuSave video, came in knowing nothing, and were like, holy crap, I gotta play this. This sounds really interesting. This opened my eyes to, how subversive and interesting these games can be. I think, I'm not super popular, like I said before. I only have 550-something subscribers, even though I seem to be on a upward trajectory, which is interesting to see for a channel this niche. But, like, even with the small audience I've definitely had a lot of people who have changed their tunes and become interested in this genre, and it makes me super happy to see that and super hopeful that, other people can return the favor, so to speak, that I'll get more people interested in this, and they'll start doing videos examining it, and then more people and more people. I've changed a couple people's minds, and I think as this continues to grow, a lot more people will have their perspective changed. And bringing it back around to the PCFX, maybe the reception the PCFX has as the dating sim console, people will stop looking at that as, oh, it's the dating sim console, that's just for otaku, and they'll start looking as like, oh, the dating sim console, I heard interesting things about other dating sims, I wonder if anything on this is interesting.
The one issue that you do have with PCFX to some degree, though, is you do still have the Chip-chan kicks and things like that. And Sparkling Feather with the 12-year-old. That's like my positive aspect is my sexual appeal. Like, there is that kind of 90s anime like sexualization that doesn't get like, that will never, because that is a part of the content, right? To some degree.
And that's something that's hard to deal with is, I can talk all day about ero-game that is absolutely incredible in terms of what it's trying to say and what it's trying to convey and how it's trying to commentate on society and perception and objectification. But you can't deny that there's like a dozen Chip-chan kicks out there. There's a ton of absolute garbage. I even mentioned it in my DokuSave videos that, like, you look back before 1992, some people were trying to do stuff. Some people were trying to have themes in what they were writing, but a lot of this stuff was just straight up stare at a woman on a computer, and that carried on for a long time, and that carries into some really weird kinks. Like, ero-game is definitely a genre that has a ton of total garbage on it.
Yeah. I guess I would hesitate to say that they are completely useless and only staring at women, because I think that is often a part of them, but not the full part of them, right?
Yeah, I don't know. You look at a couple of, Ayayo-san is one game that, like, I hesitate to call it that, because I played it recently, and it's just 5 minutes, and 2 of those are H scenes, but it's the most surreal game I think I've ever played, and it feels like the developers are aware of how absolutely surreal it is. So, like, but there is, there are a couple games I played that were just straight up, pick a girl, talk to her for 1 minute, and you throw her on the bed, and then a scene happens, and the game's over. And that's, that's not uncommon at all. That kind of stuff still comes out. It was coming out all throughout the 90s, the 2000s. That's just... that's just what happens when a game genre is completely free to do whatever it wants including erotic content. You're going to get stuff that literally is just erotic content, or you're going to get people who throw in some very not okay content.
And I guess to some degree, there also is like a disconnect between like Western visual novels and Japanese ones, right? Because I feel like Doki Doki Literature Club, while a very different thing, right? That has its own appeal in its own way. Right. But I feel like the people who play Doki Doki Literature Club are probably the same kind of people who would make a visual novel today and be like, we are correcting, the generic quotes of we are correcting really, the Japanese visual novel genre and taking out the bad parts or something like that, right?
Yeah. I've seen more visual novels recently that are like, we love Japanese visual novels, we're not trying to fix anything, we're just making something based on what we love. I see more of those now as more and more huge VNs start to get localized, but absolutely there is this frustrating perception that Westerners need to quote-unquote fix the bad Japanese genre, which like you can't even begin to describe how not only ignorant that is of the genre itself and its evolution and what games are in there, but also how, you know, blatantly racist that is and how xenophobic it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done for the PCFX to be popular for a lot of aspects.
I mean, you know, make no mistake, it is a nerd system.
For sure.
But
it never will
there's
be.
an audience. There's absolutely an audience out there for it. I feel like a lot of people have not found it, you know, in sort of the Western space.
Yeah, it doesn't help that a lot of the representation for it online right now are typically people who are approaching it from a more traditional retro game perspective,
right?
In a lot of ways, which there's value to, I will say for sure. Like I want that opinion to be out there of like, hey, if you are into, you know, I don't know, Raiden. I don't know shooters either. Raiden 4. I don't know what that is, but Raiden 4 is the name I know.
It's a real video game.
It's a good shoot 'em up. It's a good shoot 'em up.
If you're into Raiden 4, like there's not going to be really anything for you on the PCFX in a lot of ways, and I think that's reasonable. I think the weirder stuff is where you have like somebody who's like showing the opening to do-do-dee-da-do-da and talking about how it's a ridiculously long animated cutscene when it's something that like most video games have an intro and it's like not that long. It's a title screen animation. You can skip it. Like weird stuff like that. Or calling Team Innocent a full motion video game, which is like, how far did you get into Team Innocent? Like those things I think have significantly less value beyond presenting the fact that when you start a game like this as an English speaker, you need to be in that position where you're willing to sit down and give it some time. If you get to the part of a game where there's like 2 sentences happening, you can't understand it and you're already frustrated, and that's valid for some people. That will be like, that's a valid point for that. I think that's kind of part of it, and that's like one thing I try to do with my channel in general is try to present different views of those things, even if I don't even necessarily agree with it at times. Like, I will try to do that and be like, okay, let's show what this looks like from another perspective, kind of thing.
Right.
So the only other thing I want to say about this as well is that I really am not a huge fan of the whole like PCFX, if only the PCFX conversation that goes around. Basically just this idea that the PCFX is a wasted opportunity because it didn't follow like the same route as platforms like the PC Engine, Saturn, and PS1. Because there's so many other systems that accomplish that goal. And like it's the answer's, in my opinion, like, hey, there are other systems for you, kind of thing. The system doesn't have to be for you. But I understand as a PC Engine fan perspective, our console successor wasn't what that console was, right?
Right. And yeah, I think there's a lot of, you know, people like what they like and they want to have more of what they like. And the PCFX is obviously, it's got a super, super specific audience. And because a lot of that audience just simply does not exist in English-speaking spaces, there is always that conversation of, oh, well, what if the PCFX did this? What if it did this? What if it did that? Instead of people trying to meet it where it is and appreciate what it has. Because, you know, it's, like we talked about, its genres are fundamentally in this current space, even if things are getting, you know, better at a really good rate, it's fundamentally not what people into retro games want. So they're just going to keep wishing and imagining what it could have been if it did something different.
I was just going to say, very specific to the PC Engine fandom, I feel like, too, is, you know, I hear like, oh, and then the PCFX only has one shoot 'em up on it, right? And I've been thinking about the fact that, like, when the PC Engine came out, right, in the 80s, shoot 'em ups could sell a system, right? I mean, that had like the best arcade port of R-Type that, you know, possibly, you know, any home console had. But, you know, fast forward into the mid 90s, like early 90s, you are not going to sell a system on shoot 'em ups, right? I mean, that was like shoot 'em ups as a genre, like they still exist, right? But you're not going to lead your new system with shoot 'em ups. It would be like the PlayStation 4 like leading with a shoot 'em up or something, right? You know, like that's not going to, those exist on the system, but I mean, you're going to lead with like big, you know, flashy open world games with like great 3D graphics and stuff like that. So I think it's just very unrealistic to think of the PCFX as, you know, a system that would have pinned its fortunes on a library of shoot 'em ups at that time.
And it's also, I feel like a lot of Western PC Engine players also forget that, by 92 onward, the PC Engine had a really strong base of text-heavy RPGs and visual novels. Like, you obviously have the Inoue games, there were Gunbuster games, Sazon Eyes got its own VN. It's actually one of the few games that tries to use the arcade card. There's a good amount of visual novels and ADV games and RPGs on the PC Engine. And those were big successful titles. You can look at sales charts and see games like Yuna 2 and Tokimeki Memorial topping the PCFN or the PC Engine sales charts.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I don't think, I could be wrong, but I really don't get the impression that outside countries were a priority in working with the PCFX. It was rare even at that time for that to be a thing in general for consoles, but, PC Engine is a system that succeeded there, right? I don't get the impression TurboGrafx did. I think it did as well as it could have here, kind of thing.
Yeah.
In the market it was in. So, so all you PC Engine fans are just terrible people. No. I always feel bad because I feel like I give PC Engine fans such a hard time. It's just, I think there is just like a disconnect there with that.
I love PC Engine fans. It's my favorite 16-bit console. I love my Super Famicom. I love my Mega Drive. PC Engine's always a system I'm going to go back to, fire up, hook up to my CRT, and just play a round of Soldier Blade or some other game. I think it's one of the best consoles ever made. I have no disrespect for its PC Engine fans at all. I get why people are upset with the PCFX and that wish it could have been something different, but I'm also a huge ADV game and ero-game nerd, and from that perspective, I think the PCFX is super fascinating.
I think that's a good note to end on. PCFX is super fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's perfect.
We're all on the same page.
Yeah.
I will say Soldier Blade is literally the only shooter I've ever played, and the only PC Engine game I've ever played in my life. So
damn, you kind of ruined it for yourself. It's one of the best games on the system, one of the best shooters.
Yeah, I played it on Virtual Console. I don't know what possessed me. It happened though. But yeah. So yeah, that's it for this week. Again, thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
We'll see. I seem to keep making PCFX podcasts randomly, so we'll see. Maybe in the future there will be more.
Maybe at that point I'll have covered more PCFX stuff. Who knows?
Yeah. So Noelle.
Yes.
What's going on? Where can people find you? I know your YouTube name is different than your name that I've called you. So
yeah. So if you want to find me on Twitter and see me retweet a bunch of anime artwork and talk about games you probably can't understand because Japanese is hard, I'm at Speedy Noelle on Twitter. If you want to watch my YouTube videos where you can watch me spend upwards of an hour talking about old visual novels, you can find me there as Amelie Doree. You can find me probably easiest by just searching Pia Carrot video review, and I might be the top result. That seems to be something that happens a lot for people.
And there'll be links as well for the video version too, and everything. So. And then is PCFX, probably gonna be a big presence in the future? You think for you, or do you think you might extend out to maybe doing more PC98 stuff?
I think it's going to be, right now I'm really going to focus on PC98 and a lot of older ero-game because, it's more easily readable because I can use text hooks. Yeah, because a lot of the time Japanese grammar isn't a trouble for me. It's sometimes words or I don't know kanji readings or stuff like that. But give me a year or two, year and a half, maybe, somewhere in between the span of 1 to 2 years, I feel like PCFX content's really going to start cropping up more and more on my channel. And, in that time, I'm going to try and regularly test myself because I do want, I want more PCFX content in 2023. I want to take a look at other Angelique games. I want to take a look at stuff like Power Dolls FX if I can squeeze it into a video that isn't specifically about it. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that I feel absolutely deserves full contextual coverage.
Pro tip, do not use the mouse for Power Dolls FX. That is a terrible mouse game.
So the good news is I don't have the mouse. I don't have the money for the mouse. So problem solved.
I lucked out. I got it for free because I ordered it and it wasn't working. And then they just refunded me and said, don't send it back. And then Filler looked at it for me and fixed it. So thank you again, Filler.
Oh, my pleasure.
Filler, so you have the Oh My Goddess coming up here. I don't know when that's happening. I know it's difficult to ever date something like that, but what's a reasonable time frame like a year, maybe more? Or...
I would not even venture to make a guess. So suffice to say, like the hacking work, I think I was trying to think of Elmer. I think Elmer actually put a variable width font into that. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm thinking of Team Innocent, but like last I knew, pretty much the script was insertable as long as it was translated. So like there's this vague chance that like literally that project could be public in like 3 months, and then there's also probably just as good a chance that it's never going to be available to anyone. So so who knows, but like, so rest assured that I'm going to keep working on the script here. And hopefully get that finished up pretty soon.
And you also have your YouTube channel. I think you're largely doing pickup videos for that route now, right?
Pretty much, yeah. Vlogs and things like that. It's hard for me to get up the motivation to do videos. I think it's really just like I don't know. I'm just old, and I'm like I have other things that I'm like focusing on, right? But I do feel like I'm uniquely positioned to like talk about some things. So, I do like to try to like put either my thoughts or sort of like, I don't know, my shopping lists up there or whatever it is that I think is, might actually contribute something. So yeah, Playongo on YouTube. And, honestly, if you're interested in my fan translation stuff, I would take a look at my website, projects.matsmessyroom.com, or just, keep an eye on romhacking.net. You'll see that stuff there.
Did you ever follow up on the like self-sufficient stuff? I know you made like one post about it. Okay, food security, yeah. I
haven't made a follow-up video, but I've been thinking that I might, because I just put in two blueberry bushes, that other hardy kiwi. I did a little bit of maple sugaring this past winter. I got my evaporator, like boiler, all set up to do that and stuff like that. So, it's one of the reasons I didn't really mention my Twitter is like I tend to doom post a lot on that because I'm a little.
I will say,
like
you're less.
Things are
you post sad politics, but you're significantly less doom posty than a lot of people I know. So you're not bad. You're not bad at all.
Okay. All right. I guess that's good. That's good to hear. But I am like I'm trying to like become a little more self-sufficient, which it's a good thing. It really is. I mean, literally, I'm like, this is the stuff like our grandparents used to do. I feel like it's really just my parents' generation that kind of seemed to just sort of get away from that and sort of throw it all out the window. Yeah. So that's coming along well. I'll probably do an update.
I do appreciate those posts though, because a lot of times I don't know much about it, so it's interesting to see like your perspective on it and everything. Yeah. So
sure.
So yeah. All right. And then as for me, my name is Benjamin Yoder, OneControl.com. You're listening to this because you know me. I go through phases where I do PCFX content and then it seems to disappear. Usually that is because I kill myself making one piece and then I get distracted by other things. So I am currently working on multiple PCFX things right now. But to follow up on the discussions that we had last week, I do have an English guide for UnitFX coming up. For this one, I did try to add a little more extra opinion in there on the game's quality and like also the value of the game. A lot of that I think is as we discussed a bit in the last podcast. And then I have some other stuff in the works. When it's going to happen is another thing, but it is actively being put together. Yeah. Yes. There's like 8 things being put together between PCFX, Wii, GameCube, and all this other garbage that I need to focus. That's one thing I super respect about your channel, Noelle, is like you are focused. I really respect that. I am not focused. But I just like so many different things. Like I like games for girls and stuff like that. And like everyone has the different things, but you can actually like say this doesn't belong here. Yes. Where I'm like, no, Happy Dance Collection on the same channel as Team Innocent. 2 things, they gotta go together, man.
What? I admire it. I absolutely admire it. I love sticking to one subject. I admire that your channel is just whatever you're interested in doing a video on.
Yes, maybe not a good thing to make a business around, but I'm not really trying, so. So, yeah.
whenever I randomly like put on one of your, podcasts or something, I'm always interested. Whatever you talk about is always interesting, whether it's something like I feel like I'd be interested in.
Yeah. Anyways, but yeah, so I'll continue to have PCFX stuff, if not in the near future, I'm sure it will show up on the channel at some point. So if you follow along, you can do that, but definitely check out Noelle, definitely check out Playongo, or Filler's YouTube channel as well. And support the PCFX community. Come join us. Talk on the internet about it. I'd appreciate that. We like you if you're a PCFX fan.
You're one of the dozen that exists, so your company is much appreciated.
Yes. Anyways, thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.